3. H. Killam, 1828, B. Norris, 1841, J. Clark, 1848. 4. S. W. Cole, 1963. 5. A. Baldy, 1826. The last edition of Pritchard was edited and enlarged by E. Norris, J.C. Pritchard, 1855. 6. A. L. von Schweizer, Platinum 8, 1781, page 161. 7. E. Renaud, 1855, page 189. 294. African Linguistic Classification. One hand and the bandit on the other. 8. The identity of this latter group of closely related languages was by this time clearly recognized. It was variously called the Caporeirian or South African family of languages. The HE name bandit, from the word for people in many of these languages, was first proposed by W. H. Idley, the founder of comparative Bantu studies in 1851, and is the name under which it has been known ever since. For there remained a very large group of languages embracing most of those spoken in the western and eastern Sudan which could not be assigned to the groups just mentioned, that is, those which were not Semitic, Hamitic, Sem or Bandit. These were generally called Negro languages and provided the greatest problem for classifiers. Norris in his 1855 revision of Pritchard's work admitted that they eluded classification and that the Negroes hitherto have been considered as constituting one race rather from physiological than philological evidence. 9. Although all the overall classifications of African languages up to the recent period completely separated Bantu from Negro languages, a few observers noted that some or many of the languages considered to be Negro, especially those in West Africa, showed relationship to Bantu. Apparently the first was Bishop O. E. Vital in his introduction to Samuel Crowther's Grammar of Yoruba. Degrees. A comprehensive statement is that of Bleak Who extended the name Bantu to the greater part of Western Africa as far as 13° northern latitude, extending in that region from the lands of Senegal to those of the Upper Nile. 1. This basic idea was revived in modified form MUCH later by Westermann and in a more explicit way by Greenberg in the now current classification. 5. The affiliation of Malagasy to Malayo-Polynesian and hence its non-relationship to the languages of Africa had been already noted as early as the 17th century, as has been seen, and what's generally accepted. The decade of the 1860s was noteworthy for two comprehensive classifications which were destined to dominate the field until about 1910. The first of these was that of Lepsius which appeared in two versions in 1863 and 1880 respectively. 12. The other was that of Friedrich Mell which likewise had two versions, that of 1867 and 1884. 13. The work of Mell provided the basis of the important study of R. N. Cust, which helped to popularize his work in the English-speaking world. Cust's essay is an A. H. Lichtenstein, 1811-12. 9. J.C. Pritchard, 1855. Volume 1, page 427. 10. O. E. Vital in F.A. Crowther, 1852. 11. W. H. Idley, 1862-9, volume I. PVII. 12. R. Lepsius, 2nd BDN 1863 and 1880. 13. FMELL, 1867-1876-84. For African languages VI, to 1877 and III, 1 1884. 295. Methodology and African Prehistory extremely valuable source for the bibliography of African linguistics up to that period. Both Lepsius and Mell excluded Malagasy from consideration as linguistically non-African. For the rest, the main problem to which they addressed themselves was that of the Negro languages and their position in relation to Bantu, since the latter was the one well-established and extensive grouping of languages spoken by Negro peoples. In both Mell's and Lepsius' classifications, racial considerations played a large role although in different ways. The basis of Lepsius' classification was a criterion of types of noun classification. This approach derived from the earlier work of Bleak 1851. 14. Bleak was impressed by what he considered a fundamental difference between the Bantu languages, which had complex systems of noun classes in which sex-gender played no part, and the Semitic and Hamitic languages which had sex-gender as their principle of noun classification. Pursuing this distinction, Bleek assigned Khoi to Hamitic because it had sex-gender, in spite of its basic similarities in virtually all other respects to the San languages. Lepsius, taking Bleek's general idea as his point of departure, considered that among languages spoken by black populations, Bantu with its non-sex noun classification was fundamental, while the remaining languages were mixed, having undergone Hamitic influence. He classified the languages into 4 groups, 1 Bantu, 2 mixed Negro, 3 Hamitic, 4 Semitic. Fundamentally there were, however, 2 sets of languages, A. Bantu and mixed Negro class languages, and B. Semitic and Hamitic gender languages. Ultimately the latter should be shown to be related to Indo-European, which also has sex-gender. In fact, Indo-European, Semitic and Hamitic were called by him the Noahide family, with its 3 branches representing the 3 sons of Noah, Japheth, Shem and Ham. The superiority of the gender languages is explicitly stated. It seems, however, unquestionable that the 3 great branches of gender languages were not only in the past the depositories and the organs of the historical process of human civilization, but that to them, and particularly their youngest branch, the Japhetic, belongs the further hope of the world. 15 The intellectual line of descent of the Hamitic theory from Bleek through Lepsius to the theories of Meinhof at a later period is evident. In the Eller's comprehensive work of 1884, the world's known languages are classified on the assumption of a fundamental agreement between physical type and language. His basic divisions are the languages of the straight-haired peoples, the languages of the woolly-haired peoples, and so on. This assumption leads him, for example, to classify Khoi not with Hamitic, like Lepsius, but with Papuan among the languages of the Frisi. 14. W. H. I. Bleek, 1851. 15. C. R. Lepsius, 1880, Pigo. 296. African linguistic classification. Haired races. The majority of Negro languages are divided into African Negro and Bantu. His hypothesis on this question is the exact opposite of Lepsius, since he considers the former basic and the latter derivative. The number of languages spoken by black populations are considered to belong to a more culturally advanced group called Nuba Fula, whose speakers were physically related to Mediterraneans and Dravidians as curly-haired. In Cuft's popularizations of MELL for the English-speaking world, the languages of Africa are divided into the following 6 groups: I Semitic, 2 Hamite, 3 Nuba Fula, 4 Negro, 5 Bantu, 6 Khoisan. For some time questions of classification were in abeyance as interest concentrated on the vast scientific task of African language description. Westerman's work on the Sudanic languages 1911 and Meinhof's on Hamitic 1912 usher in the modern period. 16. The former of these, whose basic thesis was apparently developed by Westerman under Meinhof's influence, introduced the term Sudanic to embrace virtually all the languages of Africa not included in Semitic, Hamitic in the extended sense given it by Meinhof, Bantu or San. It thus embraced essentially all those languages which had earlier been called Negro languages. Westerman selected from this vast assemblage 8 languages. Nowhere is a complete listing given, of which 5 were from the Western Sudan and 3 from the Eastern Sudan, and sought to establish their relationship by a series of etymologies and reconstructed ancestral forms. Meinhof, already famous for his basic work on comparative Bantu, in his book on the languages of the Hamites sought to extend the membership of Hamitic beyond generally accepted bounds to include such languages as Fulani, Masayan, following the Lepsius, Khoi, basically on the criterion of gender. This work contained definite overtones of Hamitic racial superiority. 7. From the joint work of Meinhof and Westerman there thus emerged the 5-fold scheme: Semitic, Hamitic, Sudanic, Bantu, San. These results were popularized in the English-speaking world by the writings of Alice Werner and became standard in anthropological and linguistic textbooks. 8. This classification did not remain unchallenged during its period of dominance, approximately 1910 to 50. Though not reflected in the usual textbook treatment, the most significant criticism came from Westerman himself in his important study of 1927 on Western Sudanic languages. 19. In this work he limited his former conception of Sudanic languages to those of West Africa and distinguished by means of detailed lexical and grammatical documentation a number of distinct subgroups within West Sudanic, e.g. 16. D. V. Westermann, 1911, C. Meinhof, 1912. 17. The Hamitic hypothesis became the basis for much culture-historical interpretation. O. M. This, C. E. R. Sander, 1969. 18. 8. Werner, 1915 and 1930. 19. D. Westermann, 1927. 297. Methodology and African Prehistory. West Atlantic, KW 8, Gore. Even more significantly, he pointed to detailed resemblances in vocabulary and grammatical structure between West Suganic and Bantu, without ever stating their relationship in a fully explicit manner. In fact, Sir Henry Johnston in his vast work on Bantu and Semil-Bantu had considered many West African languages as affiliated with Bantu. 20. In his terminology they were Semil-Bantu. However, he adhered to the typological criterion of noun classification, so that of two closely related languages, if one had noun classes it would be Semil-Bantu while the other would not. Brief mention should also be made of several other classifications of the period 1910 to 50, of which only that of De La Fosse attained any currency. One of these was proposed by A. Drexel, who sought to establish an agreement between African language families and cultures, a relationship which was posited by the Culture Créole. The H.E. French Africanist M. De La Fosse, in contrast to the German investigators of the period, limited Hamitic to Berber, to Egyptian and Chalchidic, and treated all other non-Semitic and non-Khoisan languages as forming a vast Negro-African family. 22. In addition to 16 non-Bantu branches, many of which were established on a geographic rather than a purely linguistic basis, De La Fosse apparently considered that Bantu was to be included as Negro-African. Part of De La Fosse's terminology is still current among Africanists of French expression. Mention should also be made of Mile Homburger, who likewise, starting from the notion of African linguistic unity but even more broadly conceived, espoused the theory of an Egyptian source as the explanation of this unity, and even, without considering it to be contradictory, an ultimate derivation from the Dravidian languages of India. 23. In 1949-50, in a series of articles in the Southwestern Journal of Anthropology, the present writer outlined what was in many respects a new classification and one which ultimately won broad acceptance. 24. It differed from previous classifications methodologically in a number of ways. It was 20. H. Johnston, 1919-22. 21. Note added at the request of a member of the committee. This classification runs counter not only to the views of German scholars but indeed to the scientific facts. North African linguists have shown up the political motivations which prompted the colonial school of French Berber scholars to classify the Berber languages among the Hamito-Semitic languages. The fact is that Berber is a Semitic language and is even one of the oldest of that family of languages, together with Akkadian and Hebrew. Hence, it is neither Hamito-Semitic nor Afro-Asiatic, as stated elsewhere in this chapter. See, in particular, in Arabic, M. LFAC, 1971. 22. M. De La Fosse, 1924, pages 463-560. 23. L. Homburger, 1941. 24. For the most recent version of the Greenberg classification, C.J.H. Greenberg, 1966. A bibliography of the controversial literature on this subject is found in D. Winston, Greenberg's Classification of African Languages, African Language Studies, 7 1966, pages 160-70. For a different viewpoint see Chapter 11 above by Professor Holdrog. 298. African Linguistic Classification. Strictly genetic in the sense described in the introductory section of this paper. Hence massive resemblances of MOMG groups of languages involving sound and meaning simultaneously, whether involving roots, vocabulary or grammatical formats, were viewed as probative. Resemblances involving sound only, without meaning, for example, agreement in having tone, or resemblances extending to meaning only without sound, for example, grammatical gender where the phonetic form of the markers did not agree, were considered irrelevant. Such typological features had, as we have seen, figured largely in previous classifications. The mere possession of sex gender was not considered as evidence for relationship since, for example, sex gender MOY and does arise independently in different parts of the world. On the other hand, the existence of a feminine gender marker T in all branches of Afro-Asiatic Hamarto-Semitic is a piece of positive evidence for relationship. Similarly, the absence of gender through loss of the category is not in itself negative evidence. This is generally accepted in areas where the comparative method is well established, for example, Indo-European, Persian, Armenian and Hittite. The MOMG others do not have sex gender, whereas most other languages of the family do. Earlier classifications, for example, that of Lepsius, did not use and cite any concrete evidence for groupings. Westermann in his work on Suganic did provide etymologies, but only for 8 languages out of the hundreds involved. The only previous work which did this in detail was Westermann's later work on Western Suganic, and this only for part of Africa. In the present writer's classification, etymological and specific COMM grammatical features were presented for all major groupings based on an exhaustive review of the literature. The most important concrete proposals, some of which have produced a fairly extensive controversial literature, are the following. ADHE relationship of Bantu to Western Suganic based in Westermann's data is accepted. Moreover, Bantu became not a separate branch of the larger family but merely the subgroup within what Westermann called the Benue Congos Emil Bantu subgroup of his Western Suganic. Further, MENY other languages farther east at the eastern branch are part of the family which was renamed Niger-Congo. BOF the proposed extensions of Hamitic by Meinhof, only Hausa was accepted. Further, Hausa is but one member of an extensive branch Chadic of Hamarto-Semitic. Semitic is included but merely as a single branch coordinate with the others. Hence Hamitic becomes merely an arbitrary name for non-Semitic branches of the larger family now renamed Afro-Asiatic and viewed as consisting of 5 branches, I Berber, 2 Ancient Egyptian, 3 Semitic, 4 Cushitic, 5 Chadic. 25. Che Lucas, 1938, pages 286-99, M. R. Cohen, 1947. 299. Methodology and African Prehistory. C. Negro languages not included in Niger-Congo were shown to belong to another major grouping called Nilo-Saharan. D. Khoi was classified as a San language belonging to the central group of South African Khoi-San. The overall result is that African languages are classified into 4 major families excluding Marana as described in the following sections, in which each one of these families is considered in detail. 26. In this exposition, recent proposals modifying or extending the original classification are mentioned where appropriate, as well as more drastic criticisms. The Afro-Asiatic languages. 27. These languages, also called Hamarto-Semitic, cover all of northern Africa, almost all of the eastern Horn of Africa, Ethiopia, Somalia. Some languages of the Cushitic branch are spoken as far south as Tanzania. In addition, the Semitic branch includes languages which at present or in former times included almost the entire Middle East. Afro-Asiatic is generally analyzed as consisting of 5 about equally differentiated divisions: Berber, to 8 Ancient Egyptian, Semitic, Cushitic and Chadic. However, Fleming has recently proposed that the languages which had been hitherto classified as West Cushitic, the group including Kafid and other languages in southwestern Ethiopia, in fact constitute a 6th branch for which the names Homotic and Ariana have been proposed. 29. The Berber branch of Afro-Asiatic has less internal differentiation than any other branch of Afro-Asiatic except Egyptian. Its main division seems to be between the language of the various Tuareg groups in the Sahara and the Berber proper of North Africa and Mauritania. It is probable that the extinct language of the Guanches of the Canary Islands was affiliated with Berber. In addition, mention should be of the existence of old Libyan inscriptions which are imperfectly understood but possibly represent an earlier form of Berber. A 2nd branch of Afro-Asiatic, the Egyptian, is documented in the earlier period by hieroglyphic inscriptions, hieratic papyri and in the latest. 26. For more detailed listing of languages than is possible given the length limitation on this chapter, see J.H. Greenberg, 1963b, the volumes of the series Handbook of African Languages and the Provisional Language Map of Africa by D. Selby, 1977, published by the International African Institute, London, N.C. F. and F. M. Dublin, 1973. 27. At the Cairo Symposium on the Peopling of Ancient Egypt, African scholars recalled that Professor Greenberg's classification overlooked the fundamental fact of the establishment of phonetic rules. Their view is shared by Professor Istvan Fodor. The same African scholars put forward arguments to prove the genetic-linguistic relationship existing between ancient Egyptian and modern African languages. 28. Cf. Note 21 above. 29. H. C. Fleming, 1969. 300. African Linguistic Classification. Period. Also by documents in the Demotic script. All these scripts represent the same spoken language. In the Christian period this language continued to be spoken and developed an extensive literature written in an alphabet adapted from the Greek. In this later Coptic form there were a number of literary dialects of which Bohairic still survives in liturgical use in the Coptic Church. After the Arab conquest of Egypt, the ancient Egyptian language gradually lost ground and became extinct as a spoken language probably in the 17th century. The Semitic branch of Afro-Asiatic has far more internal differentiation than either Berber or Egyptian. It is usually assumed that the most fundamental division within Semitic is between East Semitic and West Semitic. The HE former is represented only by the long-extinct Akkadian written in cuneiform. It has two basic regional dialects, Southern Babylonian and Northern Assyrian. West Semitic is in turn divided into Northwest Semitic and Southwest Semitic. The former of these includes Canaanite Hebrew, Moabite, Phoenician and, probably, Ugaritic and Aramaic. Of these only Hebrew, revived as a spoken language within the past century as the language of Israel, and the two dialects of Aramaic still survive. The modern forms in Aramaic represent survivals of West Aramaic and the Anti-Liban of Syria, and East Aramaic chiefly in northern Iraq. Southeast Semitic likewise has two divisions, northern and southern. The northern branch contains most of the dialects of the Arabian Peninsula and their modern descendants, dominant in a vast area embracing North Africa, the Middle East and parts of the Sudan i.e. Arabic proper. The HE Southern Division consists on the one hand of South Arabic and on the other of the Semitic languages of Ethiopia. South Arabic is known in its earlier form from Minan, Sabian and Kutabanian inscriptions and in its contemporary form of Mehri and Shari in South Arabia and Socotra, the language of the island of Socotra in the Indian Ocean. The Ethiopian Semitic languages divide into a northern group Tigrinya, Tigray and Giz or classical Ethiopia and a southern group Amharic, Gurj, Argot, Gabat and Harari. The fourth group of Afro-Asiatic languages, the Chalchidic, contains a large number of languages which fall into five strongly differentiated branches, the northern, central, eastern, southern and western. Northern Chalchidic consists essentially of a single language, that of the Bajau. The HE Central Chalchidic languages are sometimes called the Ago languages. They were probably once spoken over a continuous area but their former speakers have largely adopted Ethiopian Semitic languages. The HE Falasha, or Ethiopian Jews, formerly spoke an Ago language. The HE Central Chalchidic languages include the northern group Bilam, Gamir, Kaman and Awaya in the south. Eastern Chalchidic includes the two Chalchidic languages with the largest number of speakers, Somali and Gallup. The HE Eastern Chalchidic languages fall into the following groups: Iafar, Sahel, 2 Somali, Baso, Rendil, Boni, 3 Gallup, Konso, Jidali, Barbord, Warazi, Sami, Gelabit. 301. Methodology and African Prehistory. Mogagato, Fersidimo, Alabit, Therasis, Habia, Combat Tak, Burgi. These the last Fersidimo Burgi is probably to be grouped as a single branch against the three others. The HE Southern Chalchidic languages are spoken in Tanzania. They included Burundi, Garo, Kalawit, and Chamba Asusani and Imbagut. This southern group is linguistically closest to Eastern Chalchidic and is quite possibly to be classified as merely the subgroup of the latter. One Southern Chalchidic language, Mbugu, has been extensively influenced by Bantu both grammatically and lexically so that some investigators consider it to be a mixed language. The Western Chalchidic languages are extremely divergent from the other languages traditionally considered to be Chalchidic. At the very least Chalchidic would fall into two groups, Western versus the remainder. As noted earlier, Fleming has proposed that it be considered a separate sixth branch of Afro-Asiatic. The Western Chalchidic languages may be divided into two groups, Ari and Afro-Ari. The term Bako was used in the earlier literature and the remainder. These in turn may be grouped as follows: 1. Manji, Nato, Shiko, 2. Janjaro, 3. Kafat, Mocha, Shinisha, Southern Damio, 4. Imiro, 5. The Omito group Western Sidamo including Kra, Male, Basquito, the Willamo cluster, Zasi and Khoi Ragadiko. The last branch of Afro-Asiatic to be considered is Chadic. It includes Hausa, the most widely spoken language in West Africa, and perhaps as many as 100 other languages spoken by much smaller populations. In Greenberg 1963b the Chadic languages were divided into 9 subgroups as follows: 1. A House of Gwandara, Bibitenchiizime, C. Iwarjawa Northern Bachi Group, I. Ibarawa Southern Bachi Group, D. Ibolwa Group, I. Angas Group, I. Iran Group, 2. Koroko Group, 3. Batamarji, 4. A Musgoid Group, B. Maracom Group, 5. Gidar, 6. Mandaragamergu, 7. Musgu, 8. Musabana Group, 9. Eastern Chadic, A Sombrai Group, B. Gadri Group, C. Sokaro Group, D. Module, E. Tuberi, F. Mudbai Group. NEWMBN and IM have suggested that of the above subfamilies 3 and 6 are particularly close to each other and likewise 1 and 9. For the former of the groupings the name Bu Mandara is proposed and for the latter Plateau Sahel. 30. Nothing is asserted by them regarding the other subgroups. Niger Kordofanian. This family has 2 branches, very unequal in numbers of speakers and geographical extent. The first, Niger-Congo, covers a very considerable portion of sub-Saharan Africa including almost all of West Africa and parts of the central and eastern Sudan, and its Bantu sub-branch occupies most of central, east and southern Africa. Kordofanian, the other branch. 30. Pinuman and Armad, 1964. 302. African linguistic classification of Niger Kordofanian is confined to a limited area in the Kordofan region of Sudan. The basic division with Niger-Congo is that between Amande languages and the rest. In addition to lacking many of the most common lexical items found in the rest of Niger-Congo, Mande has no convincing traces of the noun classification generally found both in Kordofanian and in the remainder of Niger-Congo. There are, of course, many individual languages in Niger-Congo which have lost this system. Because of this divergence of Amande language, Mukarovsky has proposed that Mande is really a branch of Nilo-Saharan, the other large family of Negro-African languages, but the well-known expert on Mande languages, William E. Weimers, disagrees. 31. Within MEND it is now universally agreed that the division between Mande Tan and Mande Fu based on the word for tan first proposed by de la Fosse is invalid. 32. Amande languages may be classified as follows: A. Northern Western Division, I. Northern including Susuyawanka, Saninka, Wianumu, Ligbi, Bikono, Kasanka and Maininka Bombaradula. 2. Southwestern, Membandi, Loko, Loma, Capella. B. Southern Eastern Division, 1. Southern, Mano, Dam, Taran, MW8, Hana, Gan, Baro. 2. Eastern, Samo, Bisa, Busa. A single language Bobo thing remains unassigned. It is clearly Mande but it should perhaps be considered the earliest offshoot within the stock so that genetically it represents one of 2 branches, the other being Mande proper. The remaining Niger-Congo languages are classified in Greenberg 1963c into 5 branches: 1. West Atlantic, Tagore, 3. KW8, for Painway Congo, 5. Adamawa Eastern. However, of these groups 2, 3 and 4 are particularly close and form the kind of nuclear group within which in particular the boundary between Painway Congo and KW is not clear. 33. The West Atlantic languages, the term introduced by Westermann in 1928 and substantially identical in its membership with the Senegalo-Guinean of de la Fosse and subsequent French investigators, fall into 2 clearly marked groups, a northern and a southern. This and the internal diversity, particularly in the northern group, has led Delby to suggest the abandonment of the concept of West Atlantic and to the assertion of the independence of the southern subgroup, consisting of Greenberg's southern West Atlantic minus Limb. For this group he proposes the term Mel. 3. For however, in a more recent study David Sapir, buttressed by glottochronological evidence, reasserts the basic unity of West Atlantic as traditionally conceived and includes Limbu within the southern branch. 35. 31. H. G. Mukarovsky, 1966. 32. M. Delafos, 1901. 33. On this question CJH. Greenberg, 1963 c. pages 215 to 17. 34. D. Telby, 1965, pages 1 to 17. 35. C.D. Sapir, 1974 b. Sapir, however, expresses some reservations regarding the conclusions cited in the text. 303. Methodology and African Prehistory. The chief innovation that he proposes is that Bihago, the language of the Bihago Islands, should be considered a separate branch coordinate with the northern and southern. This corresponds with MYOWN impression of the divergence of this language. It should be noted that the classification of Fula, considered to be Hamitic by Meinhof and the subject of much controversy, is now by general agreement included within West Atlantic. The classification of West Atlantic is then as follows: A. Northern branch, I. Fula, Firer, B. Wolof, 2 NOM group, 3. Ola, Manjak, Balanta, 4. A. Tenda, Bayfari, B. Kon Higi, B. Biofarda, Ayem, C. Kobayana, Bankham, D. Nalu, B. Southern branch, 1 Sua Kubnat, 2 A. Tempnigulga, B. Sherbrokrim, Giashi, C. Gola, 3. Limb, C. Bihago. Another major grouping within Niger-Congo is Gor. The N alternative name is Voltaic, a designation which is particularly common in the French literature. The most recent suggestion regarding subclassification within Gor is that of Bender Samuel, which is followed here in outline. It is noted that the great majority of languages which have been considered to be Gor belong to one very large subgroup called Central Gor by Bender Samuel. 36. This corresponds to the Musi-Grunchi group of earlier investigations. Central Gor may be divided into 3 subgroups, 1 Morkerman, 2 Gruze group, 3 Temari. The remaining subgroups of Gor are 1 Bagu Baraga, 2 Logari, 3 Bwmu, 4 Kalongo, 5 Kermadirama, 6 Win, 7 Semufo group, 8 Sem, 9 Dogon. Even granted the validity of a KW group as distinct from Painway Congo, as mentioned earlier, there are 2 subgroups, Kru in the extreme west and Ijo in the extreme east, whose assignment to KW may be considered doubtful. With these reservations, the basic subgroupings of KW are as follows, stated in approximately west to east order: 1 Kru languages, 2 Western KW, which includes the UFO, the Akan one now sometimes called Baltica Magiahang, and the so-called Togo remnant languages, 3 Yoruba, Igala, 4 Nupe group, 5 Edo group, 6 Idoma group, 7 Igbo, 8 Ijo. Painway Congo is essentially the same subgroup of Niger-Congo which was called Painway Cross or Semil-Bantu by Westermann, with the addition of Bantu within the Bantoid subdivision. There are 4 basic divisions within Painway Congo: 1 Plateau languages, 2 Jukunoid, 3 Cross River, containing as its largest language community Efik-Ibibio, 4 Bantoid, consisting of Bantu, Tif and a number of smaller languages in the Middle Painway area. The number of languages in Nigeria formerly considered Semil-Bantu in the broad sense are now generally agreed to be Bantu. Included here are the Bamilek, Ikoi and Jero groups. The most fundamental division within Bantu itself may be between such languages and Bantu in its conventional acceptation. Within Bantu in this latter sense the basic division appears to be 36. I am following here in the details of subgrouping JT. Bender Samuel, Niger-Congo, Gor in T. 8. Subio Education Linguistics in Sub-Saharan Africa Paris/The Hague, Mouton pages 141 to 78. 304. African Linguistic Classification. Between Eastern and Western Bantu. For finer subgroupings the division by GUF3 into zones indicated by letters, but variously modified by different specialists, is current. 37. The assignment of the Bantu grouping as a whole to a subgroup of Painway Congo, itself a branch of the large Niger-Congo family, has been one of the most controversial aspects of Greenberg's classification. GUF3 in particular espoused the notion that Bantu is genetically independent and that the extensive resemblances to Bantu found in the other Niger-Congo languages is the result of Bantu influences on a fundamentally different group of languages. He has argued on this basis that the original Bantu point of origin is the nuclear area of southern Shab. Greenberg places it in the Middle Painway Valley in Nigeria because the most closely related languages of the Bantoid subgroup of Painway Congo are spoken there. 38. The final grouping within Niger-Congo is the Adamawa Eastern Branch. The Adamawa group consists of many relatively small language communities. Among WHOM the Chamba and Mbuya may be mentioned as examples. The HE Eastern Branch contains a number of languages of major importance. For example, Jibaya in the Central African Republic and Zanda. 39. In contrast to the vast Niger-Congo family just discussed, the other branch of Niger-Kordofanian, namely the Kordofanian languages, contains no language of major importance and shares a Karadas and hills with various languages of the Nilo-Saharan stock. It may be divided into 5 highly differentiated subgroups, of which one, the TUM group, is the most divergent of all. These subgroups are Ikola, Tutekali, 3 Talodi, 4 Katla, 5 TUM also called Kadali Krongo. 40. The Nilo-Saharan family. The other major Negro-African language stock is Nilo-Saharan. In general it is spoken north and east of the Niger-Congo languages and is predominant in the upper Nile Valley and the eastern parts of the Sahara and Sudan. It has however the western outlier in Songhai of the Niger Valley. It has one very large branch, Shari Nile, containing the majority of the languages of the entire family. In essentially west to east order, the branches of Nilo-Saharan are as follows: 1 Songhai, 2 Saharan, Kanuri Kangambu, Beta Daza, C Zagwa, Berti, 3 Madan, 4 Kuritan, 5 Shari Nile C. 37. For this classification cm. Guthrie, 1948. 38. OM The Bantu Controversy cm. Guthrie, 1962, pages 273-82, R. Oliver, 1966, pages 361-76, J.H. Greenberg, 1972, pages 189-16. 39. For a detailed listing of the Adamawa Eastern languages see J.H. Greenberg, 1966, page 9. 40. For more detailed information on the Kordofanian languages see J.H. Greenberg, 1966, page 149. 3 OS. Methodology and African Prehistory. The following sections for further details. 6 Koma, Gansa, Ujuk, Gi, Gumuz and Mau. The Shari Nile languages include 2 major groups, Eastern Sudanic and Central Sudanic, and 2 individual languages, Berta and Kunama. Eastern Sudanic is the largest single unit within Nilo-Saharan. It contains the following 10 subgroups: I Muthian, A Nile Muthian, B Kordofan Muthian, C Midog, D Birkt, 2 Mural Divinga groups, 3 Area, 4 Ingersanatavi, 5 Yamathafidi, 6 Temain, T Zumbanad, 7 Mararat group, 8 Degudajo group, 9 Nilotic divided into 8 Western Nilotic, Budrun, Luo group and Dinkanur. The Eastern Nilotic, Ibari group, I Karamoyan, Tiso, Turkana, Masai, C Southern Nilotic, Nambi, Suk, Tiroga, 10 Nyanjia, the Asoic. Considerable controversy exists concerning the classification of 2 subgroups of Nilotic, namely Eastern and Southern. Meinhof in classifying Masai as Hamitic evidently intended to include other languages of these 2 groups in spite of their close resemblance to the languages classified here as Western Nilotic, for example, Shilluk, Luo, Dinka. His separation of such otherwise similar languages as, for example, Shilluk and Masai was carried out primarily because of the possession of sex gender by the latter. Westermann attempted a compromise position, calling the languages of the Eastern and Southern Nilotes Nilo-Hamitic, presumably on the assumption that they are mixed languages. He reserved the term Nilotic for Western Nilotic. Tucker at first adopted a view of this sort but later moved these languages closer to Nilotic, calling them Para-Nilotic. 41 other divergent views in the recent period have been those of Hohenberger, who compared Masai to Semitic, and Huntingford, who apparently sought to revive the earlier views of Meinhof that these languages are Hamitic. 42. The other extensive subgroup of Shari Nile is Central Sudanic. It may be divided into 6 subgroups as follows: 1 Bongo Biturmi, 2 Kritish, 3 Morumati, 4 Mangbitu, 5 Mangbutu ef, 6 Lendu. The Khoisan family. All of the Khoisan languages have clip sounds and the majority of their speakers belong to the physically distinctive San type. The bulk of the Khoisan languages are spoken in southern Africa. However, There are two small populations much farther north in Tanzania, the Hadza and Sandal, with languages differing considerably both from each other and from those of South Africa. Accordingly, the family is divided into three branches: 1 Hadza, 2 Sandal, 3 South African Khoisan. South African Khoisan consists of three groups of languages: 1 Northern, containing the Northern San languages of Bia and Ankung; 2 Central, 41 Ca. N. Tucker and M. 8 Brighton, 1966. 42 OM. These developments C.G. W. B. Huntingford, 1956, I. Hohenberger, 1956, J.H. Greenberg, 1957 B. 306. African Linguistic Classification. Khoisan, divided into two groups: A. Hichware, B. Mara, Khoi, 3 Southern San, the internally most differentiated group with a considerable number of individual San languages. 43. As was noted in the section of this chapter dealing with the history of classification, the number of linguists, Bleek, Lepsius and later Meinhof, separated Khoi from San and assigned it to Hamitic. The modified form of this theory is espoused at the present time by E. O. J. Westphal. 44. He divides Khoisan as described here into two independent families. One is Sandal Khoi, consisting of Sandal and the Central Khoisan languages. All these languages except Hichware have sex gender. Nothing is asserted concerning a possible connection with Hamitic-Semitic. Westphal's other group, Hadza San, consists of Hadza and the Northern and Southern San languages. However, he considers the connection between Hadza and the San languages not to be completely established. The Merida language, which has come to dominate the languages of African origin spoken in some regions of the island of Madagascar, is not included in the foregoing classification. Its status as an Austronesian Malayo-Polynesian language has never been disputed. Its closest relative within Austronesian is probably a Mayan language of Borneo. 45. Another language not mentioned in the classification is Meroitic. 46. An extinct language written in an alphabet which takes two forms, hieroglyphic and cursive. It became extinct about the 4th century of our era and is known only from archaeological remains covering approximately an area from Aswan in southern Egypt to Khartoum in Sudan. While the phonetic values of the letters are known, because of the absence of bilingual inscriptions our knowledge of lexicon and grammar is limited and uncertain. The earliest theory was that it was Nubian Griffith. A Hamitic hypothesis Meinhof, Silers was refuted in an important article by Hintze. More recently, the Nubian hypothesis has been revived in a broadened form by Trigger, who suggests that it belongs to the Eastern Sudanic sub-branch of Nilo-Saharan, to which Nubian also was assigned in the Greenberg classification. 47. Finally, mention should be made of European and Indian languages of recent importation which in some cases are now spoken by populations born in Africa. English, besides being spoken in South Africa and Zimbabwe, is the language of the descendants of the American blacks who founded Liberia, and is also spoken in Creolized form Creole in Freetown, Sierra Leone. Afrikaans, closely related to Dutch, is spoken in South Africa. There. 43. See the conflicting opinion of Professor D. Holdrog, Chapter 11. 44. E. O. J. Westphal, 1966. 45. The evidence for this hypothesis is presented in O. C. Dahl, 1951. 46. It should be remarked that the important symposium held in Cairo in January-February 1974 reviewed the research conducted into the deciphering of the Meroitic script. See Volume 2. 47. OM. This question C. F. Hintze, 1955, B. G. Trigger, Kush, 12, pages 188 to 94. 307. Methodology and African Prehistory. Is a substantial French, Spanish and Italian population in North Africa. The Creolized form of Portuguese is the first language of some thousands of speakers in Guinea and elsewhere. Finally, some languages native to India are spoken in East Africa. These include Bulgarian and Dravidian languages, most importantly Gujarati. Table 12. I. Stages of the Greenberg classification. I. 1949-50. 1 Niger Congo 2 Songhai 3 Central Sudanic 4 Central Saharan 5 Eastern Sudanic 6 Afro-Asiatic Hamatosemitic 7 Click 8 Map M 1954 Niger Congo Songhai Macro-Sudanic I-5 Eastern Sudanic I-3 Central Sudanic I-14 Vertic I-15 Kidunama Central Saharan Afro-Asiatic Click 9 Mini of Nachtagal 10 Fur 11 Tegmanian 12 Kordofanian 13 Koman 14 Vertic 15 Kidunama 16 Nyangia 7 Magan I-8 Magan I-9 Mini of Nachtagal 8 Fur 9 Tegmanian 10 Kordofanian 11 Koman 12 Nyangia HI 1963 1 Niger Kordofanian II 1 Niger Congo II 10 Kordofanian 2 Afro-Asiatic 3 Khoisan formerly II 6 Click 4 Nilo-Saharan II 2 Songhai II 4 Saharan formerly Central Saharan II 7 Magan II 8 Fur II then Komen Shari Nile including II 3 Macro-Zunic II 9 Temanian II 12 Nyangia References I Southwestern Journal of Anthropology 1949 1950 II Southwestern Journal of Anthropology 1954 II Languages of Africa 1963 308 Appendix to Chapter 12 The Language Map of Africa DW Africa, although less densely populated than the world as a whole, one has a greater degree of linguistic complexity than any other continent. 2 As a result, there has until now been no detailed charting of the continental language empire of Africa, even though it is a map so badly needed by historians and others. The Soviet ethnodemographic empire of Africa is probably the best substitute to date. 3 Although it suffers from the blurring of linguistic and ethnic distinctions, from the overloading of the map with demographic as well as ethnolinguistic data, and from the rendering of all African names in the Cyrillic alphabet. Other continental maps, of ethnic groups rather than of languages, are in general too grossly oversimplified to be of much scientific value. For some degree of oversimplification is of course inevitable in any attempt to arrive at a continental view of language distribution and relationships in Africa. The only truly accurate map would need to represent every person on the continent with a separate illuminated spot, which would move as the person moved and which would light up in any of up to 2,000 different colors according to the language that person was speaking at the moment. Since such a map is a physical impossibility, we must satisfy ourselves with something less perfect, although hopefully more detailed and accurate than the documents previously available. For the last 10 years, work has been proceeding on a specifically linguistic map of Africa as opposed to ethnic. 1. While representing approximately 20% of the total land surface of the world, Africa accounts for just below 10% of the total population of the world. 2. NEWB little more than 1/40 of the size of Africa has an equal, or even greater, degree of linguistic complexity, but nowhere in the world is there such a geographically extensive area of linguistic fragmentation as in sub-Saharan Africa. 3. Narodnaya Afriki Moscow, I-960 Encarta Narodov Afriki Moscow, 1974. 4. E.g. G.P. Murder Tribal Map of Africa 1959 or the Map of the Tribes and Nations of Modern Africa by Roy Lewis and Yvonne Foy, published by The Times in the early 1970s. W circumflex accent circumflex accent circumflex accent circumflex accent R. Fragmentation belt. S. Boundary of northern area of white affinity. Then boundary of the southern area of S. Boundary of WIDR affinity. Figure 12. A diagrammatic language map of Africa. 310. Appendix to Chapter 12, The Language Map of Africa. And the present article draws attention to aspects of this work which are relevant to the history of Africa. 5. Despite its technical appearance, the comparative study of African languages has often been oversimplistic. There has been a tendency to assume that the complex language map of today has evolved from a much simpler language map in the past, and that linguistic relationships can be expressed in terms of family trees, with a descending hierarchy of levels, families, subfamilies, branches, and so on. A belief that the many hundreds of modern languages in Africa may be traced back in regular order to a handful of proto-languages has led comparative linguistics to examine the possible ultimate and most distant relationships of African languages before establishing on a sound basis their immediate relationships. it has led them to concentrate on the historical process of divergence among languages with an assumed common origin, to the exclusion of the process of convergence among related languages or of reconvergence among related languages. The ill effects of this approach have been compounded by the fact that the pseudo-historical classifications arrived at by these means have been used also as frameworks of reference not only for African languages, but even for African peoples, and have consequently exercised an undue influence on historical thinking about Africa. A major priority must therefore be the unscrambling of the linguistic jigsaw of the African language and the people, reducing it to its immediate components, that is, language groups with a close, overall relationship and with external as well as internal unity. 6 equals complex units, or individual languages which cannot be included within any such groups as simple units. Such treatment reveals an important characteristic of a language map which has been obscured by previous classifications, namely, the fact that from a total of around 120 complex and simple units in Africa as a whole, over 100 are confined entirely to a single belt extending across Africa from the coast of Senegal in the west to the Ethiopian and East Africa islands in the east. 7 expressed in terms of individual languages. 8. 5. Language map of Africa and the adjacent islands, in compilation at the School of Oriental and African Studies and the International African Institute (IAI). The HEMAP is designed to show the modern distribution, handling linguistic relationships, of home or first languages at a basic scale of 1:500,000 within sets of more complex areas at scales of 1:2,500,000 and 1:1,250,000. A provisional edition, with a classified list of African languages, was published in 1977 by the IAI, leading to a subsequent finalized edition, to be published later by Longmans. 6. If a relationship is established among languages A, B and C, they may be considered as having internal unity. This grouping has no significance, however, unless the languages in question also possess an external unity, i.e. where the relationship of A to B, of A to C, or of C to B is in each case closer than between any of the three languages and any language excluded from the group. 7. Of the remainder, no less than 9 units include languages spoken on the fringes of the fragmentation belt, leaving only a few non-Bantu units of southern Africa and Madagascar. 3. Methodology and African prehistory. Approximately 2/3 of the total for the continent are spoken within this belt, some 5,600 kilometers in length but only 1,100 kilometers in average width. The belt runs immediately to the south of and parallel to the Saharan Desert, and, in terms of its location and linguistic complexity, may be usefully termed the sub-Saharan fragmentation belt. Its limits may be determined by reference to physical as well as linguistic geography, being roughly coterminous with the desert fringe in the north, the highland ranges in the east, the forest fringe in the south and the Atlantic coast in the west. Areas of maximal fragmentation, in spatial terms, are located along the northeastern, central and western margins of the fragmentation belt, at the southern tip of its East African salient, and in the block covering the large part of West Africa. In terms of overall structural and lexical relationships, the most fragmented area is probably in and around the tip of the East African salient, where representatives of all 4 of Greenberg's postulated African families are spoken within a radius of only 40 kilometers. In this case, and in the case of the Toto Hills, Jos Plateau, Cameroon Highlands, Nabu Hills and western Ethiopian Highlands, there appears to be some correlation between mountainous country and intense linguistic fragmentation. 9. It should also be observed that the internal relationship of certain complex units, represented by languages outside as well as by languages within the fragmentation belt, becomes increasingly blurred at the points where they enter the fragmentation belt. Degrees. The linguistic and historical importance of the fragmentation belt has been obscured by the superimposition of a network of language families and subfamilies, postulated by European and American linguists. The 2 most extensive families can be singled out as having more substance and undisputed validity than the 2 other major families of Greenberg's classification, or even than several of the subfamilies in the 8. In the case of many clusters of more or less closely related speech forms in Africa, only arbitrary distinctions can be made between languages and dialects of languages. If one treats clusters of more or less inter-intelligible speech forms as single languages, then the total for Africa is in the order of 1250. If one treats each speech form as a separate language where it is regarded as such by its speakers, and where it has a separate name, then the total would be nearer 2050. The latter method, if applied to Europe, would count Swedish, Norwegian, Danish as separate languages, but the former method would count them together as a single language. It is proposed that an order of magnitude for the number of languages in Africa be arrived at by taking the average of these two assessments, i.e. approximately 1650 languages in Africa, of which approximately 1100 arrived at by the same process are spoken within the fragmentation belt. 9. As a point of comparative interest, it is worth noting that there is a similar fragmentation belt among North American Indian languages. This largely mountainous belt, over 3,000 kilometers long and approximately 300 kilometers wide, runs parallel to the Pacific coast from South Alaska to the Mexican border, and includes an area of maximal fragmentation in North California where representatives of 6 out of 8 major postulated families of North American Indian languages have been situated within a radius of around 150 kilometers. 10. This Semitic, East Cushitic and Bantu including Bantoid. 312. Appendix to Chapter 12, the Language Map of Africa, which they have themselves been traditionally divided. Since the term family implies a more human or biological sequence of descent than is appropriate to the phenomenon of language, the term area of wider affinity may be suggested as a suitable label for each of these two families, especially as they each cover a more or less contiguous area within the African continent. The first of these, the northern area of wider affinity, has been traditionally known as Hamato-Semitic and more recently as Afro-Asiatic Greenberg or Eritreic Tucker. The second or southern area of wider affinity has been known recently under the labels Niger-Congo and Congo-Kordofanian Greenberg or Nigravic Murdoch. 11. There has been no dispute about the overall validity of these two areas of wider affinity, which have been apparent to European linguists since the 17th century 12 and presumably to African observers for very much longer. The relative importance of these two areas of wider affinity is expressed by the fact that they include between them over 80% of the languages spoken in Africa, the southern area of wider affinity itself including approximately 66% of the individual languages of the continent. In the conservative classification employed for the current language map, the languages of the northern area of wider affinity are treated within a total of 17 complex and simple units, 12 being confined entirely to the fragmentation belt, and the languages of the southern area of wider affinity within a total of 58 complex and simple units, 57 of these being confined entirely to the fragmentation belt. 13. There is an important reason for not establishing intermediate levels of relationship between the ultimate areas of wider affinity at the continental level, and the immediate complex or simple units at the relatively local level. This is the fact that such intermediate levels of linguistic relationship are, for an as yet indeterminate reason, much less obvious and difficult to define than the ultimate and immediate levels. Thus it is that the unity of West Atlantic or KWA or Goropainway Congo, within the southern area of wider affinity, or the unity of Cushitic or Chadic, within the northern area, has never yet been adequately demonstrated. Although attention was drawn some years ago to this major area of weakness in the traditional European and American classification of African languages, these